very much for joining us today. On behalf of Hogan Lovells, I would like to give you a very warm welcome, and and also thank the European Corporate Governance Institute and the British Academy, and in particular the project The Future of the Corporation, for allowing us to organize this event. I mean, this is actually not organized by Hogan Lovells. We are hosting the event, but we're extremely happy to do it with these two organizations and to have you all here to really have a fascinating discussion. I would also like to thank the speakers. So thank you, Professor Suskind and Professor Meyer, for making this a reality and for allowing us to have a conversation. And I should also add that actually artificial intelligence is a fascinating topic, not just for academics, but also for lawyers. And the other day I heard that Elon Musk said that, was referring to some words of Stephen Hawking, who said artificial intelligence will be the best or the worst thing of humanity. Now, I don't know what's going to be, I don't know, but what I can say is that we already, as lawyers, have a strong interest in the subject. And it's interesting that it's not just because it relates to our profession, so we are definitely looking for ways to improve the management of evidence, the better drafting, faster search of market intelligence. So we are constantly looking for ways to improve the way we work and to make everything faster and be able to build less time for our clients, always thinking about our clients. But it's also interesting because it affects the business, and it affects the companies and ultimately the clients for which we work, and also the area of the law that we work in. So we are already seeing in the antitrust world a strong interest in AI and artificial intelligence. We have already heard the European Commissioner Vestea making a reference to artificial intelligence and to the fact that there is something, or there could be something as a collusive arithmetic collusion. So the question is, can artificial intelligence actually become a cartelist? And what she says is, well, definitely companies cannot escape responsibility for and cannot hide behind a computer program. So they have to be responsible. There needs to be something like compliance by design, and ultimately this is behavior that cannot escape responsibility. But this discussion goes farther, and there have also been conferences, well, in all sectors, and even at the OECD, and I'm sure this will come up in our discussion. And lastly, also the European Commission came up, literally 2 weeks ago, with a call for experts. So they're creating this expert group to deal with artificial intelligence and to have them advise on what to do next. So that's the good question. What kind of initiatives do they have to take, and what kind of guidelines or advice do they need to provide to stakeholders in terms of ethical considerations? So there is a lot going on, and I'm sure that this will come up during our discussion. And so without further ado, I will pass on the word to Colin. So Colin, for those who do not know, Colin Mayer is a Professor Peter Moores at Said Business School at Oxford University. He's also the lead academic of the Future of the Corporation project of the British Academy and a member of ECGI. And today he presented his book, Prosperity. Let me see what I get it. Prosperity, better business makes the greater good, and it seems it has been a great success. So over to you, Colin, and thanks again for being with us today. Thank you.
Salome, thank you very much indeed for that very kind introduction and for having raised so many interesting issues that indeed we will be pursuing during the course of this discussion. And I'd like to start off by thanking Hogan Lovells for very kindly hosting this evening's event. It's very generous of them to have provided such a wonderful facility for holding this discussion. The background to it is As you mentioned, I'm leading a programme of research at the British Academy on the future of the corporation. And the programme is literally trying to answer that question as to what the corporation in 20 or 30 years' time will or should look like. And it comes against the background of a lot of concern about the role of business in society, concern in relation to environmental, social, political questions, as well as the normal economic and financial ones. But it also comes against the background of remarkable changes in technology and scientific advances that offer greater opportunities for business to be a real force for good in the future or a force for ill. And nowhere is this brought more to the fore than in relation to the issue of artificial intelligence. And what we really want to do tonight is to explore the issues of AI as they relate to business and the law. There are lots of aspects that have been discussed, in particular in relation to the future of work and the way in which AI might displace many of the things that we take for granted today. But it's this intersection between AI and business and the law that we really want to explore. And you're in for a real treat. You're in for a real treat because we have an exceptional person with us this evening to talk on that subject. Richard Susskind is probably one of the leading thinkers in the world on AI and its impact on the world in which we live, and in particular in relation to the professions. And with his son Daniel, he's published this book called The Future of the Professions. And he is an advisor to the Lord Chief Justice in the UK on technology and strategy. He is president of the Society for Computers and Law. He is chairman of the advisory committee of the Oxford Internet Institute, and he is a professor of law, not just at one university, but three of them, at Gresham College in London, at University College London, and at Strathclyde. So he is someone who is really going to help us steer through some of the complex questions that Salome has already referred to about how we should interpret what is in prospect from AI in terms of many of the issues that are very conventional and well known to us in the spheres of competition policy, law, regulation, and also in terms of thinking about how business of the future will and should look. Now, I'd like to start off, Richard, by just asking you, how should we think about the influence that AI is likely to have on law and business in the future? Why is it so important?
Well, I want to thank, first of all, Hogan Lovells for hosting and for a more than generous introduction. On AI and technology generally, so my background, in the 80s, when I was a doctoral student in Oxford, I wrote my thesis in artificial intelligence and law, so it's been a lifelong interest of mine. And the truth is, in the 80s, the technologies weren't nearly as impressive as they are now. It's only now that we're able to have this discussion about the realistic, practical implications of the latest developments in technology. I'm not entirely comfortable, nor have been, with the term artificial intelligence. We'll use it, but it creates more problems than it solves. The phrase we tend to use in our book is increasingly capable systems. And that's the first thought I'd like to plant in your minds, that we are living at a time when the systems that are being developed are doing more and more. Every day you look at the newspaper, there's a new case study example, breakthrough, development system app, and there's no obvious end to this. There doesn't seem to be any finishing line. So we're all terribly fortunate, I believe, to have been born at a time when our technologies are becoming increasingly capable, but this also means they're taking on more and more tasks that historically we thought could only be undertaken by human beings. And that might be answering questions. So the best example of systems that answer questions, I suppose, is Watson's, IBM's Watson. That was the system developed by IBM to appear in a TV quiz show in the United States. And in 2011, in a live episode of this program quiz called Jeopardy, a computer system beat the two best ever human champions. So that's a system essentially answering questions about anything under the sun more accurately and more rapidly than the best human beings. And then we're seeing, and I suppose for many of us this is the defining change in technology, we're seeing this move away from thinking that what you do with a computer system is you program it. Someone sits down and puts together a set of instructions to tell it what to do. And we're moving into this era which people call machine learning. It's a whole bundle of different terms, data science and so forth. But machine learning, basically the idea that machines, you don't program them, they learn from past data. And this allows them to make predictions about outcomes. So in medicine, for example, my favorite example, a system now can look at a lesion, a freckle, a mole, and tell more accurately than any dermatologist whether or not that mole or lesion is cancerous. And this system knows nothing about dermatology or histopathology, but it's got 117,000 past cases, images together with the results. And from that, it can predict the likelihood of, for any given lesion, of it being cancerous more accurately than a human doctor. Now, or dermatologist, in fact. And this is what we're seeing in so many different areas, whether it be law or business and so forth, systems that are making predictions, predicting outcomes more accurately. This is tremendously important. The third area I just wanted to, well, there's two other areas I should mention. One is the whole area of robotics. And of course, some people call that part of AI, some people don't, but certainly our robotic systems are becoming increasingly capable, and the best example, of course, is driverless cars. And even today, though, in the Times, you see a headline about someone being run over tragically by a driverless car. We're clearly not there yet, but I don't think any serious commentator is doubting within a decade a significant part of the transportation industry will have been radically transformed by this technology. Again, this technology not developed by programming the instructions of what you do when you come to a junction. It's all based on huge amounts of past data sucked up and gathered by conventional vehicles. The fourth thing I wanted to mention was what's called affective computing, which I suspect few of you will have heard of. It's quite obscure, but it's systems that can both detect and express human emotions. A system that can look at your face and tell whether or not you're angry or surprised or disgusted. There's now a system more accurately than any human being can look at a human smile and tell if the smile's fake or genuine. And so we're moving into a very different era. If you combine all of these things, systems that can answer questions, that's one point. Systems that use huge amounts of past data to make very accurate predictions, often more accurate than human beings. This whole field of robotics, and we're seeing this field of affective computing machines that can both detect and express human emotions, where at this time, when I say increasingly capable machines, they're taking on more and more of our tasks. And in law and in business, we have to ask, what does this mean for those who are actively involved as human beings as part of their careers in these areas? So that's about the technology. Did you want me just to say something just about the future?
Yeah.
It's interesting because your project's The Future of the Corporation. And I've written two books that start The Future of. One was called The Future of Law in 1996, and the second one that was mentioned, The Future of the Professions, that I wrote with my son. It was only writing The Future of the Professions when we came towards the end of writing this, and I think Colin's heard me say this before, but we suddenly realised perhaps that we were asking the wrong question. We were asking the question, what's the future of the professions? And what I'm about to say, I'm not saying this to be humorous, I'm saying this as a serious observation, that if you ask a question like, what's the future of the professions, you're assuming the professions have a future. So, and I know that sounds quite funny, but it's the same in the future of the corporation. You're already assuming the corporation is part of the landscape of the future, potentially. I mean, in the same way as we didn't assume that in writing our book that was called that. But the point I'm raising is this. It's best illustrated, I think, by a recent talk I gave to 2,000 neurosurgeons. And these 2,000 neurosurgeons, I mean, terribly scary, because neurosurgeons are such great, impressive people within the professions. And I was asked to be controversial. So my opening line was, people don't want neurosurgeons. A little bit of a pause there when I tried to see and they said, what people want is health. And what I tried to say was that, in the end, what we see today is certain problems that human beings have with their bodies, to which neurosurgeons and their technologies are the only answer. But in the future, we can imagine different ways of sorting out these problems. So I said, you might think I'm here to talk about robotic surgery, but I think in 60 or 70 years, we'll think it's really bizarre. We used to cut heads open, because all the procedures in the future will be minimally or non-invasive, and there won't really be neurosurgery anymore. And people want that, though, because it's the answer to the health problem. And the story I always tell in this context is about Black & Decker, who are the manufacturers of power tools. And apparently when they recruit new executives, they take them off on a course and put up a slide of a power drill, and they say to the new executives, this is what we sell, isn't it? And the new executives say, of course that's what we sell, we're Black & Decker. And the trainers, with great satisfaction, say that's not what we sell, because that's not really what our customers want. Next slide, please. And that kind of a picture of a hole neatly drilled in a piece of wood. And they say that's what our customers really want, and it's your job to find ever more creative, imaginative and competitive ways of giving our customers what they want. Now, just bringing these stories together, for me, the question of the future of X, it's not so much how can we look at what's done in X for the corporation professions, how can we look at the tasks involved and somehow use technology to do it better. When you're thinking about the future, this is my own method of how you think about the future, you should be outcome-based rather than task-based. You should take a step back and say, what is the purpose of? So, I mean, interesting, to which I absolutely don't know the answer really, but if you're thinking about the future of the corporation, and Colin, you're far more expert than I am on this, the interesting question is, what social and economic function does a corporation serve? And in the world into which we are venturing, might these same purposes be served by a new kind of entity, or might they still be well served by a refined or improved corporation?
Okay, you've got us off to a great start. You first of all said that the future of the corporation might be that it hasn't got a future at all. And secondly, you said the future of lawyers is that they may have no future.
We could stop that.
Yeah, okay, so that's pretty good. Now, let's pursue that a bit, because two areas that really haven't been affected that much by technology to date have been the boardroom and the courtroom.
Yes.
So could you just talk us through how AI might fundamentally change the way in which both boardrooms and courtrooms operate in the future?
Well, let me talk first of all about the courtrooms. And I can do this at two levels. I've been heavily involved with, in England, I chaired the group that came up with the idea of online courts. For a long time I've been worried that our court system in England, is true in most countries, for low value problems and disputes, it's just too expensive, it's too time consuming. For the average person it's unintelligible, and there must be better ways in the internet society of helping people sort out their small problems. And I was asked to chair this group, and we looked at a field called online dispute resolution, which had been not looking at courts, but it was looking at different methods for resolving disputes. So, for example, on eBay, you may know that on eBay there are 60 million disputes every year amongst traders, but they're not referred to the courts. There's an online dispute resolution mechanism. And in so many different areas, we found these uses of online dispute resolution. We thought, why should that be an alternative? Surely that should be tomorrow's court system. We can use these techniques. So we asked a question, and it's a bit like my outcomes question. Are courts a service or a place? Do you really need physically to congregate together to have a state-based dispute resolution service in operation? We challenged that, and interestingly it's now become judicial and government policy to introduce these systems in England and Wales over the next few years. Now, you see, the interesting question there is, or often people say to me, court lawyers will say, I hear what you've been saying about technology and lawyers, but how on earth could a computer system ever stand up in court? How could a computer system make an argument to a judge? And that's the wrong kind of question. That's being task-based. That's thinking that the future of the courtroom is taking the individual participants and seeing if we can replace them with a machine. Whereas what we did is we said, well, what's the outcome we want? Well, surely painless, quick, cheap, reliable, authoritative dispute resolution. And so it's not the machines will replace advocates, it's that the new method won't require advocates. It's not that you'll have a machine standing up in court. When we wrote that book, the Economist ran a column, a page on it, and did this great cartoon of what they call Professor Dr. Robot QC. And it looked like a robot, and it had a stethoscope, it had a ledger for the account, it had all the accoutrements of professionals. And that is the kind of unspoken assumption many of us have when we think about technology. You think it comes along and substitutes, replaces, but does the same kind of things that we used to do as professionals. But that, I suspect, is not how it's going to unfold. I get so tired of seeing these cartoons of robot lawyers that are drafting documents. I often say, I don't really see why you need a document drafting system to have nostrils and arms. I mean, we're just copying human beings, but that's not how it's going to unfold. So that in the courtroom already, within the next couple of years, we're seeing this idea of technology being used to deliver online courts. Nothing about AI there. One can imagine, and this is something I talk a lot to the judges about, one can imagine, say, and I'm not sure if it's 10 or 20 years' time, but some of the decision making, some of the discretion that we pass along to judges in society could perhaps be taken over by machines. Whether or not it should do is a moral question. We might think that should never happen, even if machines are better than judges, because it's really important that human beings are judges. But one can imagine, in principle, systems performing some kind of, or delivering some kind of outcomes. And so to give you a concrete illustration, there's a system called Lex Machina, which was developed by Stanford University and was bought by LexisNexis, of which many claims are made, but one of them has said that it can predict the outcome of a patent dispute in the United States more accurately than any patent lawyer.
Wow.
And so that system's already in place. Again, like the dermatological system, it knows nothing of the law. What it has is past data about past cases, who the judge was, who the lawyer was, the subject matter of the claim, the value of the claim, and so forth. It turns out if you've got enough of these objective details of past cases, you can make a prediction that's more accurate than a lawyer. Now, again, many people say, well, hang on a second, this knows nothing of the law, this is possibly dangerous. But you've got to go back to outcomes. So what's the question every person, every client will ask when there's a dispute coming over the horizon? They always ask the question, what's our chances of winning? And if a computer system can predict that more accurately than a human being, we have to be alive to that, the market preferring that option. And it was interesting when this book was launched, Lord Neuberger, who was then President of the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom, he said when you read that, it made him think, what is the point of judges? And what is it that we can do that they won't be able to do? Now, we're years away from even technically being able to replace how it is that judges do what they do today, but it's conceivable that some of the work of the courts will be done by technology, and that's why last week I gave a talk to a whole bunch of High Court judges, and we're talking about this intensely. So that's the courtroom. The boardroom is interesting. So many different functions around the boardroom table. So I just wanted to consider a couple of things. One was the whole idea of audit and the audit committee and the interest of a board in audit. And we looked at the whole discipline of audit, and audit's a funny old thing, isn't it, when you think about it? That and for 3 years in the 80s, I worked with what's now Ernst & Young and did quite a lot of work at that stage. It was looking at AI and audit, and we couldn't see how it would work at that stage, but we can now. But when you think about audit happens, that once a year, a sample of financial transactions are reviewed to ensure that they correspond to the public statement of financial health. And it's a hugely important function because it underpins and it supports people's investment decisions. And you have internal audit, similarly to undertake analogous checks, you have an audit committee and so forth. But when you look at machine learning and data science and the emergence of the new techniques, two questions arise. One is, why are we only looking at a sample? We now have technology which allows us to make at vast bodies of data. If we can cope with the amount of data coming out of the Hadron Collider, we can cope with the number of financial transactions, even the biggest company in the world. So in our research, when we spoke to the leading audit firms, this is something they're looking into. But the other thing is more profound, which is why do it only once a year? And the reason you do it only once a year is because hitherto there was no other way of doing it. But surely you could have some kind of system providing some kind of audit and review in background, in real time, all the time. And just in broad outline, that is the future of audit. Real time, 100% review financial transactions and the correspondence to public statements. And I think there'll be cultural and regulatory reasons that won't be introduced as quickly as it ought. But you can already see a big chunk of boardroom and business activity being taken on by a very different kind of machine. Now, this is not to say that these systems are 100% reliable. It's not to say there aren't problems, for example, of privacy. It's not to say there aren't problems at all. It's just to give you a flavour of what might be possible. And the second example in the boardroom was in 2014. I think this was the first example, and I don't fully understand from speaking as a lawyer what this means, but in 2014 in Hong Kong, a venture capital firm appointed an algorithm to its board. I'm also not clear if it was this board or it was its investment committee, but it's the idea, and a lot of noise was made about it, that you appointed an algorithm to the board. And intuitively you think, well, that's really bizarre. First of all, what would that look like? Do you reserve a seat for an algorithm? I don't know what it looks and feels like. But again, if you take a step back, you say, well, if you're making big investment decisions and there is an entity that can more accurately survey the market, more accurately make prediction of financial outcomes, more reliably review all sorts of financial data, you could imagine shareholders saying, actually, I'd quite like that system to have some kind of input in the decision making. And if you're making decisions, and I can't remember the technicalities here, by majority or whatever, a majority of votes, why not allocate a vote to that system? Now, from a legal point of view, I can't see how that system could yet have legal personality and more importantly, perhaps, of responsibility. The other responsibilities that would flow from sitting around that table. But when you reflect upon it, it doesn't seem... It's our conception of what happens around the boardroom table that's the limiting factor. If you take this step back and you think about outcomes, what we really want is the best investment decisions, what we really want is the best audit processes, you begin to see, well, actually, maybe there are alternatives.
So, just to pursue two elements of that. First of all, in judgments, we want an element of judgment.
Yeah.
And that involves not just assembling as much information as one possibly can from the past, but using some aspect of discretion. Likewise, in relation to your algorithm at the board table, yes, I can understand that that algorithm possesses more information than any individual around the board can possess, but does not necessarily have the same ability in terms of discretion as to how ultimately to make the decision.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, you can look at judgment and discretion, again using my method of analysis of earlier, because I think judgment and discretion are human faculties, and the temptation is to think, I can't see how a computer system could exercise judgment, I can't see how you can give a computer system discretion. But again, I think there's a different way of looking at it, and the question of judgment is, why is it that we ask our judges, our lawyers, our great business people to exercise their judgment? Why as human beings do we exercise the faculty of judgment? To what problem is judgment the solution? Is the way I would phrase it. And when we did research on this, and because many people say in the profession, what you're missing here is judgment. That's why you go to a professional, they exercise judgment. And so we went, well, actually, just hang on a second, what? It's not that people say, I'd like to buy some judgment, people, please. It's that for certain categories of problem, the way that these are sorted out is by engaging human beings who exercise this faculty called judgment. And so for me, the more interesting challenge when I wrote the book, and thinking this was, well, I wonder why it is that we need to call upon our judgment. And the answer to that, there's not a definitive answer, but our inclination was to think the answer was an answer in the area of uncertainty. That almost always the reason people go to professionals is because you're uncertain. You're uncertain about your situation. I don't have the knowledge to classify or understand, but I've got a grievance or a problem or issue or a challenge. I'm uncertain about exactly what shape it should take or it does take. And secondly, I don't have the knowledge, expertise, insight, experience to sort out this problem. So the reason people come to us is problems of uncertainty, and therefore the way I frame the question, therefore, would be not can a computer system exercise judgment, but can a computer system handle uncertainty? And I go back to this point again and again. It's almost an entirely different mindset you need to have in thinking about the future, because the temptation is to raise flags again and again and say, here's something a human being does that a machine can't do, and to which I'll always reply, well, that's not the main question. The question is, what's the outcome of the human being exercising that faculty, and can we deliver that in different ways? So that's the question of judgment. So I'm saying that to get systems to deliver the outcomes we want when we ask someone to exercise their judgment, doesn't require us somehow to copy the way that human beings exercise judgment. Discretion is very interesting as well. And in the course, there's lots written in this. In my relative youth, I used to teach in Oxford. I used to teach jurisprudence, which a lot of jurisprudence is devoted to the question how do and should judges come to decisions. And there's often great controversy over the question of discretion. And sometimes there's a distinction drawn between weak discretion and strong discretion. And strong discretion, very, very broadly, is often aligned to this idea of judges as lawmakers, that actually it's not that they're choosing between two competing options. That's a weak discretion. It's where there's no obvious option and they lunge in and they come to a decision. So what's quite interesting there, I think, from the machine point of view is I think weak discretion, this idea that you have the option to appraise various possible courses of action and have to choose one over another, you can begin to see it. I'm falling into my trap of looking at the task, but you can begin to see how a machine might do that. Strong discretion, that's to say where there aren't any options, any obvious options available, and you've got to fill the gap. It seems to require creativity, and we're not sure if machines can do that, can we? I mean, how can a machine be creative? So then, am I speaking too much? You're happy with the trap and stuff? So I think the most interesting illustration of machines and creativity comes with AlphaGo, which many of you may have heard of. Go is a board game invented in China. It's a very complex board game. There are more permutations, possible moves in Go, apparently, than there are atoms in the universe. And about, I'll probably get the figures slightly wrong here, but about 18 months or 2 years ago, some leading AI scientists said it'll be a decade before a computer system could play a good game of Go. And then, and I think it was about a year ago, a system called AlphaGo, developed by DeepMind, it's a Google company, beat Lee Sedol, who's the world Go champion. He's not just the world Go champion, he was the kind of Roger Federer of Go. So by a long margin, just on him. There's a great documentary on Netflix about this, where you can see it all happening. So what I want you to do is think for a second about that game. He beat Lee Sedol 4 games to 1. I'd like you to think about the second game and the 37th move. And you can watch bits of it on YouTube. I certainly watch it all on Netflix. And the commentators thought that the machine move was a mistake. It moved onto what's known as the 5th line, and no human being had ever thought of doing that before. And it's quite funny in the documentary, a number of them are describing, a number of the experts are describing the move as beautiful. In another interview, one expert said it brought a tear to his eye. So no human being had ever thought of this strategy, this move. And what's interesting for me is that in a human being, we would have called that creative. We might even have called it genius, but you know, it was really none of these things. But it was delivering the outcome that in a human being we would call creative. So it was delivering that strong discretion. So for those of you inclined to say, well, you know, the real limitations of machines, they can't be creative, I'm just not sure that's the case. Creativity is a notion we attach to human beings. It's one of our difficulties. We tend to anthropomorphize. We want to describe our machines in terms that are used for human beings, and therefore, almost by definition, saying machines can't do them, and that's an unhelpful circular thing. How did the machine do it? It's quite an interesting question. So basically, it did it by, first of all, a form of what's known as supervised learning. So the system was given, I think, a couple of 100,000 past games of Go. Might not be that many. A couple of 100,000 past games of Go. So it, as it were, could machine learning learn how the experts performed this task. And then it was known as a form of reinforcement learning. This is where this idea of neural networks come in, where the system essentially played itself many millions of times and self-improved. And lawyers amongst you will love this, really, when you think about it. But this, in the end, therefore, this is a system that, if you asked it the question, if you could speak to it, say, how did you, or why did you decide to move the piece there? It can't answer it. These systems are not transparent. Why I worked in the 80s, the systems we worked on in AI were, one of the three characteristics of them was they were transparent. They could explain their lines of reasoning. These systems, I can't see what kind of explanation AlphaGo could offer that would make sense as a human being. It literally doesn't speak our language. But there's an interesting sequel. I think it's called AlphaGo Zero. Just a few weeks ago, the latest development by DeepMind, they decided, as I understand it, to develop a system without the supervised learning. So they said, forget all the past human games. Why don't we just tell it the rules of the game, and it can learn itself, because it'll know the possibilities. And that system beat the original version of AlphaGo 100 games to 0. And why this is it's disconcerting. Why this is really significant is there is a very common narrative that Dan and I challenge in our book that you hear from the major accounting firms, the major computing firms and so forth, which is, and you hear from Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, who was beaten in 1997 by a computer system. And the narrative is that the best team for the future is man, person plus machine. Because there's a contribution that human beings can make, the machines will never make, so it's the team. And what we say in our book is, hang on a second, if you accept the premise machines are becoming increasingly capable, the best you can say is over time, the contribution human beings will make will be diminishing. And if machines are becoming very, very capable, there'll be no contribution we can make at all. So what fascinates both of us about AlphaGo is that's sure the point. Because everyone was saying, well, the really clever thing about AlphaGo is that it could rely on all the past games of human beings. And of course that's not the case now. So, to answer your question, it's been a long journey, I accept, in answering this question. But the whole notion of discretion, I can quite easily imagine a system choosing with reasons and justifications in quite a human-like way between each option and say, if you can invest there, here's the reason you invest there. Strong discretion, where you actually are saying to a system, we've never seen one of these before, what should we do? Our intuition would be, actually, this is where human beings come into their own, and really what I'm trying to do is perhaps challenge that intuition.
Well, that raises the important question, and I'll throw it open in just a second to a general discussion and debate. But I do just want to pursue this point about if it's possible that these machines are essentially going to take over all human functions. Are we sure that these developments are in the interest of mankind and society at large? How do we ensure that they are? What is needed in terms of regulation and controls? Or should we just let the system rip and the best machine dominate?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? There's so much being written about this just now. I'm absolutely not saying that all of this is a good thing. You, as an economist, will know far more than me about what the market's likely to prefer. And it seems to me that when people say, there's a line of argument, for example, that says human work is very important for all of us, and what we should be doing is designing systems that ensure that as many of us as possible have good stimulating work to do. And you can see that as a very plausible argument. The trouble there is it's a very supply side argument, isn't it? So what we're saying is what's really important in medicine is making sure doctors have good stimulating work, whereas what we argue in the book, what's really important in medicine is that we can ensure as many people are as healthy as possible. And I think what patients in the market will tend to defer to is systems that deliver health rather than good work for doctors. And so I'm not saying it's inevitable, all of this, but it's pretty hard to see how the market and the recipients of service, if there's a promise of cheaper, better, more convenient service delivered by technology, won't in some way go for that. But the question you raise is just so fundamental, which is about boundaries. Are there not limits to what we want our systems to do? So I suspect many of you will share my intuition that I don't really want a computer system deciding when a life support system should be switched off and actually switching it off without a human being in the loop. Somehow that doesn't feel right to me. We may differ, and we do differ on these moral views. It doesn't seem right to me that a judge should be able to pass a sentence, or a computer judge rather, should be able to pass a life sentence without a human being in the loop. Somehow that doesn't feel right. And I use this term right because what we're into there is not the factual domain, it's the ethical domain, what's right or wrong, what's good or bad. And here is something that it seems to me our machines don't seem to have moral faculties. And so when we make a lot of judgments in the courtroom and in the boardroom about what we ought to do, often there, and increasingly, it's always been the case in law, but increasingly in business, these are ethical decisions. And ethical decisions, it's not just we say, well, actually, the machine is a moral philosopher. It's hard to imagine, isn't it, that the machine would have this intrinsic sense of right or wrongness that I have as a human being. So when I say, I don't think a machine should turn off our life support system, and for those of you who agree with that, that feeling you have, that moral inclination, I think it's important to us, and I don't think most of us would want the moral buck, as it were, to stop in a robot. And so there's a huge and very interesting series of debates going on around the world just now about the moral limits of machines. Some of them are taking the extreme version that was hinted at in the introduction, which Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, and Bill Gates in various ways have all pointed to the grave potential dangers of AI if you reach the stage of what Nick Bostrom, our colleague in Oxford, calls superintelligence. There was a chap called Marvin Minsky many years ago when I was studying, when I was doing my research in AI, he once said the next generation of machines will be so intelligent, we'll be lucky if they keep us around as household pets. And at the time that seemed quite funny. I suppose it is still slightly funny. But if you get into the area of what's known as AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, I've been talking mainly about narrow AI tonight, where in very confined areas of our world, the boardroom, the courtroom, the law office, the surgery, in very confined areas, these machines perform at a high standard. What worries people more is AGI, where a machine can, just as AlphaGo, and again narrow AI, learn how to play Go. What would happen if a machine could learn like a baby and actually could develop? And you say, well, that's very interesting. It would develop like a human being, and it would be intelligent maybe like a human being. So what happens the day after? Remember, these systems are what's known as recursively self-improving. What happens the day after it attains the level of intelligence of us? It keeps going and it doesn't stop. It's this infinite recursive, and this is why, and I can't tell you if this is right or wrong, but I can conceptually see it's an issue. This is why people like Hawking and Musk and Gates are saying, if you get this self-evolving, self-perpetuating AGI in place, we are, and this is what Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence is all about, we are creating an intelligence that we really would be a very minor player on Earth, but the intelligence is far greater than us. I'm not even sure, so I think it's a fascinating discussion, but I'm not even sure we should dwell on that this evening. The more practical moral issue is already systems are doing things where, do we want an algorithm sitting around the table? Do we want these bits of AI injected into the judicial process? And so it's interesting, isn't it? Because by and large, it's true in science. A lot of the developments are in the hands of the scientists and the R&D in the market. But actually, we need some good philosophical thinking. This is why it's very interesting the British Academy, because this is where you have people from the humanities, and so terribly important, thinking deeply about the moral and social, economic, legal implications. But as ever, we're usually a little bit behind. And as a matter of logic, you have to be behind. You can't theorise about a technology that hasn't been invented. But I think we do need to. We need a more rapid response team. Our economists, our lawyers, our philosophers, our sociologists, our psychologists. We need to be far readier, it seems to me, to respond, analyse, judge, evaluate the impacts of technologies than we are today.
Thank you. Let me throw